world over here. You know, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. You guys are fully out of lockdown, right? Are you?
Fully is a bit a strong word,
Yeah.
but everything is starting to open, yes.
Yeah.
Hospitality is going to start opening next week.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're moving steadily into freedom. It's exciting.
All right. So listen, but all of your homeschooling activities are done. You're now freed up from in that regard, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
children are going to start school next Wednesday.
Okay. All right. Well, to our audience, we're here with Anna talking about regenerative agriculture. I'm Keith Edwards, writing for one of the least well-known blogs in the world, Wine Miss and a Beam, the best wine blog you've not heard from. And Anna, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, what do I have to say? So I'm Anna, and I'm Portuguese. I've been living in the Netherlands for the last 5 years, though. I'm a mother, as we said, we talked about children. I've trained and worked as an environmental engineer for roughly 15 years. And I'm the founder of Grapekeeper, which I started 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
A
Wonderful.
bit of everything.
Yeah, yeah. So the last time we were together, and I noticed that Girl Meets Glass is on the call here, and I think she was with us in Portugal.
Yes.
That was a wonderful trip. I also saw that Dirk Nieport had liked the post, so he noticed that you were on here, and I made note of that.
Well,
So
regenerative agriculture is very dear to them, so I can
yeah.
so
Okay, so they're big players in the field.
they're moving that way. Yes, absolutely, steadily.
Okay, okay. Could you tell for our audience who might not know of Ms. Nieport, tell a little bit about them and their their business?
About Nieport.
Yeah.
Well, they are Portuguese family business with some Dutch heritage, actually. And they started in Douro as a pork producer, but they are now producing wine in several regions in Portugal and in the Mosel. And as far as I can see, they all have a pretty sustainable approach to winemaking and farming, and also extraordinary wines.
Mm-hmm. All right. So as I look at the, there are all of these varying methods of farming, and it seems like there is a fence, and you're either on this side or the other. And on the left hand side, for want of a better definition, there's this monoculture or industrial agriculture. And then on the other side, there are things like, organic, biodynamic, sustainability, permaculture, regenerative agriculture. Um, could you give us some sense of what those things all are, and at the end point, how does regenerative stand out from those other things?
Well, let's say that commercial, traditional, let's put it commercial as it is today, as opposed to all the other ones. Agriculture has one goal, which is to produce as much fruit as possible in the shortest time as possible. So it's a highly targeted approach of optimizing a system for production. Organic is, I'm not sure it's very different than that, it is just, it tries to do it in a way that does less harm. So it has a no harm approach. A sustainable, it can be sustainable as well. Organic doesn't do this at no cost. It tries to do it without the use of herbicides, pesticides, and all kind of harmful chemicals that, while help on the production of bigger and better and faster fruit, are quite harmful and depleting for the soils. And then we have all the other ones. With we have permaculture, which also tries to recreate self-sustained circle ecosystems, farming ecosystems. We talk about sustainable. Sustainable is something that is incredible and also very hard to define, because it means just that. It means that you are farming in a way that you can sustain the ecosystem, so that you're not removing more from the system. That's what you're putting back on. And that means from the soils and the rivers and the woods, but also from the company. So a company is sustainable in the way that it farms, it's sustainable in its financial ways, and it's sustainable also towards the community, social. That's roughly what sustainable means. And regenerative agriculture is, well, it tries something better and bigger than just sustaining. It tries to regenerate, which is a bigger goal. And I think, roughly speaking, that would be the differences.
Okay. So regenerative, they're trying to add things back into the system, and so the system is better off for having used net benefit for using the regenerative system.
Yes, that's the entire concept of regenerative agriculture. It tries to regenerate a system, and by a system I mean, of course, soil and crops, but also, and in regenerative agriculture, that is extremely important, all the stakeholders involved. So one of the biggest differences between regenerative agriculture and all the other standards we've talked about before is that regenerative agriculture involves a variety of practices, massively varied, because they are very much geographically oh my god, I forgot the English word, I'm so sorry for that. They're adapted geography.
Yeah.
So we're talking about practices that aim at regenerating the soil, and the soils are all very, very different. So biogeography is something that is very much into consideration. So in that point of view, you need to have a very good look at what kind of soils you have, the woods, and all the entire surrounding biology, fauna, flora, but also into the knowledge of generations past, which is something you cannot read from the book. So you really need to go back into embedded knowledge in the society, in the local culture.
Does that mean that there are, so let's say biodynamic, and I'll talk a little bit about as we go through this process, because Troon Vineyard, they're in Applegate Valley in Oregon, and they have recently embarked on they call it a biodynamic program, but the gentleman who's the manager, Craig Camp, talks about it being regenerative, and they have the space, and they're doing a bunch of different stuff other than growing grapes on there. But they also did an extensive land study. They're working with a consultant, and did extensive study across the estate. Dug a bunch of test pits, 20 or something like that, and studied the soil. And it's a long-term process that they're onto here. He thinks, but he's saying that where they are, especially from a biodynamic perspective, it's absolutely perfect. From a climate perspective and things of that nature. So the question that I have is regenerative, more possible in certain areas? Are there areas where, geographically speaking, where it's, not a possibility?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, because it is possible in all areas. It's just the approach is very different depending on the area you are. Mm-hmm. So I would say that is less prone to standardization. It's going to be very hard to certify because it's way less prone to standardization. Mm-hmm. It's very specific geographically. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say that it is, it's just that the ecosystems are different.
Yeah. So your results may be different then in terms of what you're able to put back. There may be differences in that.
Your approaches are different.
Okay.
The methods you use, the kind of crops you use, they are going to be different. Okay. But I wouldn't say the results are different, because the ultimate result is to regenerate the soil. Right. Is to regenerate life in the entire ecosystem, not only the soil, because they're all interconnected. So ultimately, regenerative agriculture looks into the natural, how it would be. Let's say we talked about Doro. So let's talk about Doro. You would look into what would be the natural autochthonous woods of it, and then you would try to replicate it with fruit producing. Mm-hmm. And there's several. This is one of the pillars of regenerative agriculture. The other one is no tilling of the soil. No tilling of the soil is because you are trying to regenerate life in the soil. Mm-hmm. And then this is a cascading effect. Soil, water, trees, hair, birds, microbes. It's a cascading effect. What you're doing with such approach is that you're trying to introduce as many possible relationships between everything in an ecosystem and create resilience.
Yeah. So you used the words no-till, and I had a question that was posed prior to the start, and so I was going to ask it later, but let me get it out of the way before it leaves my mind. The question I had was till versus no-till. Why would a viticulturist use one versus the other? And
yes.
So Yvonne Nil asked that question offline.
Well, a tilled soil tends to be a compact soil. It actually does kill a lot of organisms, mostly organisms that you don't know of the existence, and it's more reliant on add-ons, compost or even chemicals at a certain point. Mm-hmm. A no-till soil, it's a soil that it's full of organisms that can be helpful for plants. This same organism that we're talking, they help convert the nitrogen in the soil and make it available for the plants. Mm-hmm. That in response to it will create stronger and deeper roots, that will create channels, that will make the way to better irrigation of the soil. The roots make for a soil that is more resilient, again, washing of the water, and then more organisms feel more comfortable, they grow, and they positively affect this cycle. Mm-hmm. And that is the biggest proponent of no-till soil.
So more often than not, you'll be going from, I mean, there are not that many greenfield opportunities today, right? So you'll be going from a tilled environment to a no-till environment. Is that more often the case, or are
Yes.
you? Yeah, okay. So now talk about that transition process. Talk about the challenges, the decisions that have to be made, the steps that you go through. What's the cost to the farmer of making that migration, and what's the time frame that you're looking at?
Um, I think the biggest change you need to do is be patient.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to give the entire ecosystem time to heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
Once you stop tilling, it's not very. You're used to coffee. If you would, your body will thrive without it,
Mm-hmm.
but you need to give it some time to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a little period in the beginning that's not going to be very happy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but so cover crops are very important. So you stop tilling and you start introducing, a huge variety of cover crops, depending, geographically adequate. Let's put it like that. It's very important to mention this. The same remedy for every single place. It's not a way to go anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then you give time. You give time for the system to regenerate, and you keep introducing this, or you keep allowing the new things that are coming, as
Mm-hmm.
long as they still need to befit a agriculture enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
because we're still talking about this. So I think so far studies point to something between 5 years. You start seeing things after the second one,
Mm-hmm.
but at 5 year mark, you already notice a massive difference. At 10 year mark, you start noticing really, really a massive, massive, massive
Yeah.
payback from the system to you.
So what do you do with the horse in the meanwhile? I mean, so
With the what?
a lot of biodynamic guys, you see them with the horse, you know.
Well, the horse is actually it's using biodynamics,
Yeah,
and it's also biodynamics can be regenerative. They're not
yeah,
exclusive.
yeah, yeah. No, actually, I see and I was going to do a chart this morning, but I ran out of time. I see almost like a chart where there is a fair amount of overlap between those things, biodynamic, organic, and regenerative. And then we were
Organic
talking
less.
about then are the areas outside of it that's unique to each one of those, and so that's a discussion in and of itself. So tell me about for a regenerative system, what are the hallmarks? What are the things that I'm seeing that
I
I say
think that
this is a regenerative environment?
I think they have three very important pillars:
Mhm.
regenerative grazing and agroforestry. And I think that would be the most, horizontal to every kind of ecosystem
Mhm.
that are important. The no-till farming, we talked about it.
Mhm.
The regenerative grazing, I think maybe it's self-explanatory. You do need animals. You introduce animals into the ecosystem, and they will eat the grass.
Mhm.
For example, these cover crops that we talked about, they will eat them at the maximum biomass loading, for example. And while they're doing this, they will stomp the ground, they will poop on the ground, and they will add biomass to the ground.
Mhm.
So that's the horse, the ducks, the chicken, the introduction that you also see on biodynamics.
Mhm.
Agriculture systems more and more are going back to realizing that you do need animals. You
Mhm.
need them.
Mhm.
And the other one is agroforestry. So you either enclosed by forests, you mimic the forest that you are enclosed by, and this is an ideal approach. Vines being a bush, not the best. It's a bit harder to do that, but in being enclosed by forests adds a great deal. On top of that, as I said, you try to introduce more and more crops that would mimic this local forest, but in a way that they produce crops that are commercial. You know, other kinds of fruit or grains or herbs, different kinds of flowers. That's also from a commercial point of view, not only insert biodiversity into an ecosystem, but they also insert, you know, a diversity of income streams into a commercial farm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And talk about that. In some of my readings, I'm seeing that that's a really important part of the process. The income streams, both in terms of diversifying the stream of revenue coming into the farm, as well as providing a transition, helping to transition, to ease the transition to the full regenerative agriculture.
Diversification is very, very important. Diversification not only increases income through, you know, diversification of crops and products. It increases the resilience of the ecosystem. You know, the more diversified and the more of this relationships, the more the ecosystem is resilient to sudden shocks. And it helps with any transition. So you will see that what you see in the first year, it's going to be very different than in the second and then the third. I'm sorry, I got lost. What was the question again?
No, so we were talking about I kind of forgot the question myself. but so let's talk about the inputs, and carbon sequestration seems to me to be a big deal in terms of some of the inputs there. Talk about regeneration and carbon.
Yes. A lot of this cover crops that we keep talking, they are legumes, you know, or we're talking about pea likes, and there's all different things. And all these crops, all the roots of the trees, they sequester, they keep carbon in the soil. And they make it available for the plant to use, to grow. And they trap it in the soil. It doesn't go to the atmosphere. So we talked about regenerative grazing, for example. When you use animals in this sort of regenerative grazing, they eat the grass and the cover crops at the optimal biomass. The kind of positive input that this puts into the ecosystem, it's more carbon capped into the soil than it's actually gone up to the atmosphere by the production of animals. Is it clear?
But what I was driving at, though, is its relationship to climate change. One of the big deals that I see written about in terms of regenerative agriculture is its potential to be a carbon sink.
Yes, regenerative. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I wanted to get a little more at that in terms of is that a net for the farmer, or is that a net? I mean, as I
both.
Yeah. Okay. So as a farmer, that is one of the key constructs that I'm looking at.
Both. It's both. Yeah. So you build in resilience into your system, your farm, your company, your major asset, which is your soil. If you are a farming company, your major asset is your soil, or it should be. if we're not going into, you know, some models of the past that you farm till you deplete the soil, and after 10 years or 20 you move on and you go deplete it somewhere else. Someone that embarks on the regenerative agriculture already has a different version, so they know that their soil, their farm, are their biggest asset. So it's both. You help with you know, adapting to climate change. You help with CO2 disruption in the soil, and you build resilience into your economical system.
So yesterday, I saw a fairly lengthy article in Wine Searcher about biochar, and one of the you know, one of the definitions, you know, one of the articles that I was reading recently, is talked about key practices of regenerative farming, and they, like I said, they talked about no-till farming and pasture cropping. You know, they talked about organic annual cropping. You know, the compost teas. Then they talked about biochar and terra preta.
Terra
You know,
preta. Terra preta is actually it's the original biochar.
okay. So talk to
Biochar.
me about those things, and you know, how they're used, how they come into play. You know, is it something that one
Biochar is
goes out and
activated.
acquires?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's biomatter, and it's activated charcoal. It's used in a diversity of products, not only in regenerative agriculture, but it helps with enriching the soil and keeping CO2 on the soil. You have it. Terra preta is, you know, it's you produce it by burial, and it's not the same as producing oil, but it's the same kind of method. But you can produce it in any other ways, from well, going into circularity within farms, from leftover products, for example, like the pits of mangoes, or the outer part of coconuts. It depends on the region, but it is just an enrichment. It enriches the soil. It promotes this soil biodiversity, and promotes the capture of CO2.
Are there soils where they're best used, or they, you know, because like some of the references I saw were to soils that were, you know, less fertile, you know, low in organic matter. They would seem to benefit the most, or benefit best, from biochar. And again, as a farmer, do I go out and buy biochar, or is it something that I create within my environment?
I'm gonna go, since we're talking about regenerative agriculture, I'm gonna stress the fact that it's very important that we take a geographically specific approach. So what to do is, it's, you know, it's very specific to the location. It's very specific to the soil. And if we started talking about vineyards, you know, one field next to the other will have a slightly different approach. So the answer to that question can be a gazillion different things.
Yeah.
I don't think you should necessarily go and buy anything. I think you should go and look at what you have already, and talk to your neighbors. Talk first and foremost to other people already doing it. Sometimes in your location, but sometimes in others, and have very, very deep talks and conversations with maybe the grandparents or the grandparents that's, you know, farmed that soil maybe 60, 80 years ago. It's still alive. I know mine are.
Yeah. So now regenerative is, you know, broadly speaking, you know, it's applied to varying, you know, types of products and services, various types of products. Let's talk about specifically the grape growing environment. Tell me about some applications that you've seen. What are the challenges for a grape grower to utilize this kind of architecture?
Grape growing is farming.
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. It has been highly optimized in the past, and so it tended to a massive point of monoculture.
Mm-hmm.
It's a highly optimized environment. In that sense, you need to be, I think you need to be a believer. You need to be a believer to dare to change the way you are producing your grapes.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to be producing less. You're going to be introducing a lot more other kind of crops. Um, and I think you need courage.
Mm-hmm.
You need a vision, and you need courage to do that.
Mm-hmm. So in the grape growing world, if you're raising pears, or you're raising some other food crop or wheat or something like that, there's a more sense of essentiality to that. In the case of grape growing, wine is a lifestyle. It's a passion,
It is.
um, and, and so for the grape grower, things like terroir and those things become important. Marketing around the environment and things of that nature. Tell me about regenerative agriculture and its impact on terroir, so to speak.
Well, we've spoken about no-till farming
Mm-hmm.
and the enrichment of soils to allow life to go back into the soils and to allow this rich biome of the subsoil to develop itself.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Biomes, microbes in the subsoil are one of the major factors into this notion of terroir.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we know for sure. There's enough studies overall in the world that when that you using autochthonous crops. Let's put it like that. And since we're talking about wine, using more and more adapted to the soil crops, and allowing this soil to fully develop and be healthy, they will have a more diversified, wine biogeography,
Mm-hmm.
which is a major factor for the recognition of terroir.
But
So
how?
what you have, your fruit,
Yeah,
will taste of the place that is from.
yeah,
And that has to do a lot with how healthy your agricultural ecosystem is and how healthy those soils are.
yeah.
Because a lot of these imparted flavors and aromas to wine, they come from the microbes
Mm-hmm.
that are in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do, of course, with slate and schist, but the slate and schist, they allow for certain kind of microbes to grow, and these ones have a major influence in what we call terroir.
Yeah,
And
but
they tend to be stable.
yeah,
They are very stable geographically.
yeah.
So the composition of a healthy soil in a specific geolocation varies a little bit year per year, but it tends to be very stable.
Yeah. But I'm trying to get at why is that? How is that different from let's say organic or biodynamic? Is it
It does.
the case that one of those farming techniques will form a basis for a regenerative approach? I mean, is regenerative one of those plus something else, or does regenerative carve out its own space?
Uh, I think regenerative strives for more. It's a way more ambitious than any of those, despite the fact that biodynamic can very much be regenerative.
Mm-hmm.
Organic it's way less. It's a do less harm approach, or
Mm-hmm.
it started like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think standardization harmed it's harmful. Because, you know, what works in Alentejo definitely doesn't work the same way in Bordeaux and won't work the same way in Napa. So I think that trying to standardize and optimize and fit into a box with very strong rules has harmed some of those approaches. And regenerative agriculture breaks those chains. By realizing that everything is very, very specific to all the components.
So give us a couple of examples of grape growers that you've seen embark on regenerative approaches.
There are so many. There are so many in so many you know, points of the road. This is a road. You start and you keep adapting, but there's many. There's a lot of them in Portugal, in all of this, you know, some of this very natural wine growers, and some in Piemonte. We have someone that you know, in Lugana, who's working with Grapekeeper, my company. They have already started and gone. We're talking about, for example, Riveto in Piemonte. We talk about Portugal. We talk about Selva Capuzza, Stapeltehof, which is more and more moving into regenerative agriculture and definitely sustainable agriculture. But there are so many. I would be doing a disservice by, I would feel like I would be failing the many I will mention.
Yeah. So now you mentioned that someone's working with your company, Grapekeeper. Are you consulting in regenerative agriculture?
No, Grapekeeper is not a consulting company.
Yeah.
So what we do is slightly different. So with Grapekeeper, we choose you know, premium quality locations which are sustainable viticulture and winemaking with the high quality, and you can adopt a piece of the land and the production is used to make your very own wine. So it's a sustainable luxury concept in that sense. We do gather sustainable producers only. That is high quality together with very sustainable production from the viticulture part, the winemaking part, and also the sustainable society impact. All of them have different kind of projects in that area. And by doing so, you get a wine that nobody else has, and made, you know, highly personalized with your label, and you impact further this kind of practices by supporting them early on their journey and sharing a bit of the risk. And that's what Grapekeeper does. So it's a sustainable luxury concept. I have done consulting for soils prior. Now, unfortunately, running a company takes a lot of time.
Right. Now, one of the other things that I've seen is, you know, talked about is crop rotation as a practice in regenerative agriculture. As a winemaker, you know, and you have, you know, I don't know, 3 or 4 hectares of vines, you know, that's not a possibility, right? I mean, how important is crop rotation?
Of course there is. We're talking about cover crops. Of course, you can build in biodiversity corridors in many different ways. So you can build in perennial crops. And I was talking, you know, we can build in like putting on trees or aromatics, grains. But you have on the cover crops that in the middle of the lines, you can play with that a lot. You can plant different kind of legumes, plant, you know, a lot of these farms already do this. It's a plant to make tea that I am drinking and I forgot the name. Chamomile. So you rotate this. It's essential to do it because what each of these plants they give to the soil is very different.
Yeah. So yeah, and I was thinking more in terms of field rotation rather than crop rotation, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if how does a grape grower, how does the grower go about you know becoming a regenerative farmer? What are the steps? Walk us through from thinking about it to becoming a grower.
You talk to your peers
Yeah.
and you start. No tilling is it's very important, and you start early on, and then you start. You talk with your peers, you talk with your neighbors, you talk with the ones that you've seen doing it already,
Mm-hmm.
and you start trying with your very own soil.
Mm-hmm.
There is no other way. So this is not an engineering approach where there is one handy book on how to do things. We've explained the basics, cover crops, no tilling, the introduction of animals that help with all of this, biodiversity. But you need to start.
Mm-hmm.
Need to start. And the beauty of this is that you're gonna very early on start seeing the results of your own soil, which prompts most of the wine growers and farmers that I know, prompts them to want to go even further.
Yeah. So, what are the challenges that one faces as somebody embarking on this, or in the middle of it? What are the things that keep you awake at night?
Uh, well, um, the challenge it's the same challenges when anybody else starts to trying to do different.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some challenges in communication. We talked about organic certification, and I think it's mostly a communication tool.
Mm-hmm.
And when when you go and you try to go a bit further, you can use sustainable, but that can mean an array of things,
Mm-hmm.
from very, very much true to something a bit less. So I think communicating this properly to your consumers is a challenge
Mm-hmm.
that I would like to see overcome. And I think the world is changing into this, making it more understandable and valuable. And listening and being very patient with your farm. It's a very holistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
So it requires a lot of understanding, a lot of listening, a lot of talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's exciting. I find that kind of things exciting, but they're also challenging
Yeah.
for that much matter. It's a more, yeah,
So
not
letting
a straight line.
so marketing is a key part of this also. You talked about letting.
I think marketing is essential to change. It's not, I don't think people need to be educated, but I think people need to be confronted with.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know that exists. They need to experience. They need to to fill it in their glass, to go and watch these spaces. And then I think it's rather easy to communicate afterwards, because it's easier to feel the differences. But to that first step, yes, I think has been a challenge with any kind of environmental approach ever since I
Yeah.
started it. It takes a little bit to change
Yeah. So the people that you're familiar with that are involved in regenerative, are they doing a quality job, a not so good job
Yes.
on the marketing front?
Yes, they are. They are.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
But they are, and I admire them enormously,
Mm-hmm.
because they are doing a good job on marketing, but they also have a massive resilience themselves
Mm-hmm.
to experience people that say, "Oh, I don't know what that means, and I don't care." In the
Yeah.
beginning,
Yeah.
and they have beliefs, they have resilience, just very much like their own ecosystems, and I'm very proud of them. I'm seeing a question I'm going to answer.
Yeah. Yvonne is asking about yields, the impact on yields at the beginning of the conversion.
Well, when you're not pushing an ecosystem to produce the biggest amount of fruit in the shortest space of time, that is going to have impact. So you're going to end up having lower yields, but very higher qualities. And, it's also very important to talk at pricing. We're talking about a product that ends it's higher quality. It's higher quality from the product itself. It's better for the people consuming it, and it's better for the soil. So it should also be fairly priced. Once we're talking about biodynamic, regenerative agriculture, ecosystems, we are no longer shifting the true cost of production somewhere else, and we need to price them properly, accordingly. And that is something it would be good to change the perception of consuming better, not necessarily more, but better is most of the times, if properly all the costs of production are factored in, and we're talking about the cost of soils, the cost of water, the cost of people, then it ends up being a more costly product.
So that's a challenge, and that's and you mentioned water. That's one of the things that we haven't talked about, the whole water management process.
Yeah.
But if you're pricing your product, so and again it comes back to the marketing, because if you're truly pricing in that cost, the regenerative product probably is a little more expensive than the guy doing the industrial, commercial farming down the block, right?
I'm gonna say no, because the only reason that heavily industrialized, heavily chemically dependent production is cheaper is because you shift the true cost somewhere else. And you end up paying. If you can deplete the soil and produce massively and just sell and move somewhere else.
Yeah, but the economics are, around the world are based on, shifting externalities, right? So.
Yeah. So we're talking, it is a revolution.
Yeah. All right. So my final question for you is, some of the future of this approach. Is it becoming more a part of the dialogue? Is it less so? How do you see it rolling out?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think we have a choice. If we're going to be truly honest, we can avoid it for a little longer. We can always avoid taking care of issues for a little longer, but not forever. Yeah. So we don't always have a choice, and I think the earlier the better. Yeah. The earlier you tackle it, the better. Yeah. But it has not only in wine growing, but in every single kind of crop overall in the world. It's becoming more and more and more a sort of conversations, because it affects positively everybody, every single stakeholder involved, from the producer to the community to the consumer. It really it takes a leap of faith, but why wouldn't somebody not do it?
No. So the big discussions here are being held outside of the wine industry, but the wine industry is tagging along, so to speak.
I wouldn't say outside of the wine industry. I think the wine industry is also tagging along, and the wine industry has potentially a very big role, because, as you said, it's a passion. It's a product of passion. It's a product of glamour. It's a product of lifestyle. Yeah. So it is, in that sense, a very good poster child for another approach of production. I am extraordinarily excited to see the wine industry tackling this. And I
Yeah.
think it can be used not only to their own advantage, but to the advantage of the world at large.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited about the kinds of stuff that I see, and what's his name, Randall Graham from Bonnie Doon was talking that about this approach he sees as being a net positive from a terroir perspective, and so I'm excited at to see what the winemakers and the grape growers here are going to be doing about it moving forward. And I'm personally going to spend a little more time, on it as a research topic because it's exciting, I think. Yeah.
Well, tag me. I love to talk about this anyway.
Wait a minute. Yvonne has another question. Is it discussed in the Porto Protocol conversations?
I would say so, but I can't be sure. I don't know how to answer that question right now. I'm in the Netherlands now, and I've been a bit far from that.
Yeah.
So I don't know yet.
Okay. All right. So Yvonne, we are going to investigate that and get back to you. Okay, so thank you so very much, Anna, for spending the time with us. This has been very, very informative.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful rest of your day.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye,
Okay,
everybody.
bye-bye.
Have a lovely day.
Okay.